Okay, so it looks like we're rolling. This is the first time I've been doing a video in a long time. I've been meaning to do one on how to start your novel just because I have traditionally really struggled with writing the first chapter of my books, and I also one time wrote a blog post about how one should start their novel. I don't even really know if I agree with it anymore. I also stumbled upon a list of literary agents giving advice on what not to do in terms of writing the first chapter of your book. So we'll probably go through that, and that could be pretty helpful. I also tried to start writing the sequel to my novel All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter, which right now the really rough draft of that is on Wattpad, and I'm following up by posting the first draft of the sequel, which is called Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost, also on Wattpad. So I will obviously post links down in the info area, so that way you guys, if you wanted to read it, can. But anyways, we might as well just get started with this advice coming from literary agents. So this comes from a website called The Right Life, which you may have already heard of. The article title is The Worst Ways to Begin Your Novel, Advice from Literary Agents. So to precursor this, I think that something maybe we as writers can all agree on is that there's a lot of advice on what not to do out there. But of course, as a writer, your job is to do the best that you can. So it's kind of like, well, you guys have given me a lot of parameters. I don't really know what to do. So, anyways, we'll just go through the advice and discuss. So, the first piece of advice is hating on false beginnings. Fair. Cricket Freeman from the August Agency says, I don't like it when the main character dies at the end of chapter 1. Why did I just spend all this time with this character? I feel cheated. I guess what immediately comes to mind is the book Thief. Because I do remember, like, basically the narrator reveals to you in like the first chapter that everybody is going to die, kind of to do some foreshadowing and preparing for that. But the loss at the end of the novel is no less awful because you knew ahead of time. And I happen to think maybe there's something to be said about preparing people for a character's tragic death in the first chapter, because once you get to that point in the story, it may be so shocking and awful that the reader did have to mentally prep for that. Otherwise, it would just be too devastating. But there's an argument to be made about that. Lori McLean says from Forward Literary, I dislike opening scenes that you think are real, then the protagonist wakes up. It makes me feel cheated. Okay, fair. Definitely starting with a dream and then waking up could be a little annoying. Okay, in science fiction, from Chip McGregor of McGregor Literary, a sci-fi novel that spends the first 2 pages describing the strange landscape. Okay. Personally, I'm not a fan of reading or even writing an excessive amount of description of a landscape, so I can get on that. Okay, this is where I start having trouble. So prologues. Okay, they're gonna roast the prologues for a second, which is really frustrating for me, but here we go. Okay. Michelle Andelman from Regal Literary says, I'm not a fan of prologues, preferring to find myself in the midst of a moving plot on page 1 rather than being kept outside of it or eased into it. Andrea Brown from Andrea Brown Literary Agency says, most agents hate prologues. Just make the first chapter relevant and well written. Okay, this is important for those of you who hope to get traditionally published. That's kind of why I'm going through this advice, and then maybe giving my own critique as an actual author kind of back. So I have personally decided not to go with traditional publishing, at least not at this time. I don't think that my novels fit the industry right now and what big name publishing houses are looking for. I just don't think I would be able to find a place. I'm also, I hate to say it, kind of too much of a stubborn individualist where I like to do my own thing with my writing and I don't really like to be told what to do. And so it's, I don't want to have an editor at a publishing house tell me, hey, you need to completely scrap and rewrite the beginning of the novel. Even though they may have good points, I just personally would be like, I put so much time into that. How dare you tell me how to write my book? But whatever. So yeah, prologues. Most agents hate prologues, just make the first chapter relevant and well written. So this is where I get tripped up, but for those of you who think that you can pretty easily start chapter 1 right at the beginning of the story, good for you. Definitely do that if you want to submit to literary agents, because it sounds like your book will probably be thrown in the slush pile if you don't have a prologue. If you do have a prologue. Lori McLean from Forward Literary says, prologues are usually a lazy way to give backstory chunks to the reader and can be handled with more finesse throughout the story. Damn the prologue, full speed ahead. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, a lazy way to give backstory chunks. Lazy? Maybe. I personally, I hate to say this, it's so embarrassing because it's such a faux pas in the writing community, but I prefer using prologues at the beginning of my novels. And again, a big reason why I would never get traditionally published, but I just find that I can hook the reader in more by showing this like brief snippet of the main character's past, like a very defining moment, like a turning point moment in their life, and then kind of jumping to present day. And I'm not necessarily the first person to do this. I was actually just like looking through my stack of books. Like I said, like I'm pretty sure The Book Thief does something kind of similar to that. To Kill a Mockingbird, this is like my favorite book of all time. I've literally read it like 6 or 7 times all the way through, but I was looking back on it and I remembered like, so it does in fact start with chapter 1, but chapter 1 starts with an anecdote. So it's like looking back on the past. Or another example would be like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So again, technically it starts with chapter 1. It doesn't say prologue, it starts chapter 1, but chapter 1 takes place 10 years prior to chapter 2. So chapter 1 effectively acts like a prologue because you jump 10 years in time between 1 and 2. So yes, you've just eliminated the word prologue above the chapter heading, but chapter 1 is essentially still a prologue, but also it does its job because it shows an effective moment, a turning point that really does begin the hero's journey. So I personally don't necessarily see what's wrong with it. Again, I guess something that comes to mind is if you know the writing rules, you can break them. And so if you've mastered the art of novel writing and you already know you can do it very well, I don't see why you can't get away with having a prologue of sorts as your first chapter. Like, that's just my thought on the matter. So anyway, moving on. So exposition and description. Peter Miller of PMA Literary and Film Management says, perhaps my biggest pet peeve with an opening chapter is when an author features too much exposition, when they go beyond what is necessary for simply setting the scene. I want to feel as if I'm in the hands of a master storyteller and starting a story with long, flowery, overly descriptive sentences, kind of like this one, makes the writer seem amateurish and the story contrived. Of course, an equally jarring beginning can be nearly as off-putting, and I hesitate to read on if I'm feeling disoriented by the 5th page. I enjoy when writers can find a good balance between exposition and mystery. Okay, yes, this is important. Okay, too much accounting always ruins the mystery of a novel, and the unknown is what propels us to read the further. Okay, yes, so I have made this mistake pretty badly in one of my novels. It's not published. It's just the rough draft. The Last Chance, which is the 3rd book in the Last Summer series. Again, you can read that on Wattpad for free, but it's one of the rough drafts. I gave way too much information in the first chapter. And it's not a prologue. It's just the first chapter, opening scene, but then there's like all of this info dumps of like backstory, like how the character got to where she is today and like all the things that she's thinking of about her past. And it's like, that's not leaving any room for the reader to discover anything. So rather than revealing all of that up front, I should have dropped like a little nugget and then left it there. You know, something kind of obscure but intriguing to cause the reader to want to keep reading. And then, you know, a few chapters later, reveal more of the backstory. So we're painting a picture as the story moves forward. So I should have done that. So he's definitely right. Okay, Chip McGregor from McGregor Literary says, the adjective sun rose in the adjective sky, shedding its adjective light across the adjective land. Okay. Yeah, that's that's kind of a problem I've had with fantasy novels. I tend to stay away from fantasy novels simply because I don't like how they begin a lot of times. They do kind of begin in that sort of formulaic way. Lori McLean from Forward Literary says, I dislike endless laundry list character descriptions. For example, she had eyes the color of a summer sky and long blonde hair that fell in ringlets past her shoulders. Her petite nose was the perfect size for her heart-shaped face. Her azure dress, with the empire waist and long tight sleeves, sported tiny pearl buttons down the bodice. Ivory lace peeked out of the hem in front. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Work it into the story. Okay. Interesting. Good to know. I know a lot of writers have the habit of beginning their story with a laundry list description. So, again, knowing that you may want to query, definitely avoid that kind of thing if you're going to submit to literary agents. I do agree with that. Okay, starting too slowly. So Dan Lazar of Writer's House says, characters that are moving around doing little things but essentially nothing. Washing dishes and thinking, staring out the window and thinking, tying shoes, thinking. Okay, good. Yes. Okay. So something I talked about in a post I wrote on how to begin a novel is don't open with the character just thinking. There's got to be some kind of actions going on. You do want to start the story with some kind of action. Now that doesn't mean the very first sentence has to be like, bam, the character burst through the door, you know, like, you don't have to do something like that. They can think something, but be in the middle of, about to, or currently doing some physical activity or some kind of activity that moves them closer to their goal as a character. Jessica Regal from Foundry Literary and Media says, I don't really like the first day of school beginnings, from the beginning of time or once upon a time. Specifically, I dislike a chapter 1 in which nothing happens. Okay, that's also fair. We definitely want to see the inciting incident of the story happen in chapter 1. So the inciting incident is the plot point that basically kicks off the entire hero's journey. So, for example, in my novel, All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter, the plot of the novel is that the main character, her name is Stevie, short for Stephanie, she wants to play high school football for myriad reasons. But rather than having like the first chapter be her sitting in her bedroom pondering, should I go try out for football? Is that a good idea? The first chapter is her trying out for football. So it's her attending football tryouts and the struggle that is. So we're starting immediately in the thick of the character trying to pursue her goal, which is the basis of the plot. Okay. In crime fiction, Chip McGregor of McGregor Literary says, someone squinting into the sunlight with a hangover in a crime novel. Good grief, been done a million times. Yeah, I guess the point here is to try to avoid cliches. If you've seen it over and over, don't do it again. Okay, in fantasy, from Kristen Nelson of Nelson Literary. Cliché openings in fantasy can include an opening scene set in a battle, and my peeve is that I don't know any of the characters yet, so why should I care about this battle? Or with a pastoral scene where the protagonist is gathering herbs. I didn't realize how common this is. Okay, so I actually don't write fantasy and I don't really read fantasy, so I don't have too much to say on this matter, but I really like Kristen Nelson. I've loved basically every book that she has represented, so I definitely take her advice very seriously. As for voice, Emily Sylvan Kim from Prospect Agency says, I know this may sound obvious, but too much telling versus showing in the first chapter is a definite warning sign for me. The first chapter should present a compelling scene, not a roadmap for the rest of the book. The goal is to make the reader curious about your characters, fill their heads with questions that must be answered, not fill them in on exactly where, when, who, and how. Okay, good. Yeah, so this goes again with the mystery thing, and also could look like not explaining who everybody is right away. Like, you open on a scene, kind of like in a movie, and when you're watching a movie, you don't know who everybody is yet. you just open on a scene and there's some characters and they're talking like normal. It's playing out like normal life, and the reader has to kind of try to figure out where you are, who these people are, what's going on. So you just kind of give them that movie first scene snapshot. And the readers, they're always smart enough to figure it out, so you don't need to explain it to them. Cherry Weiner of Cherry Weiner Literary says, I hate reading purple prose, describing something so beautifully that has nothing to do with the actual story. Okay, I do agree with that. It does seem like a bit of a waste of time to like have this beautiful prose, but then it has absolutely nothing to do with the main plot or the main characters. It's only tangential. Daniel Lazar of Writer's House says, a cheesy hook drives me nuts. They say open with a hook to grab the reader. That's true, but there's a fine line between an intriguing hook and one that's just silly. An example of a silly hook would be opening with a line of overtly sexual dialogue. Okay, true. So, sure, if the first line makes a beta reader laugh or blush, probably maybe don't use it. Michelle Andelman of Regal Literary says, I don't like an opening line that's, my name is, introducing the narrator to the reader so blatantly. There are far better ways in Chapter 1 to establish an instant connection between narrator and reader. Yeah, my name is definitely something that like, I did when I was, in 3rd grade and would write short stories in my, like, school composition notebook. So it definitely is not professional. Okay. Although, of course, if you are an expert writer, you can get away with breaking the writing rules. But anyway, Ellen Pepys from Signature Literary Agency says, sometimes a reasonably good writer will create an interesting character and describe him in a compelling way, but then he'll turn out to be some unimportant bit player. That definitely does give the feeling of cheating the reader. You're describing this super interesting person. You're like, oh, wow, I can't wait for this to be my main character. Like, I can't wait to follow this guy on a journey. And then it turns out they're not even relevant. And it's like, well, you lost me. Okay, in romance, again from Kristen Nelson from Nelson Literary Agency. In romance, I can't stand this scenario. A woman is awakened to find a strange man in her bedroom and then automatically finds him attractive. I'm sorry, but if I awoke to a strange man in my bedroom, I'd be reaching for a weapon, not admiring the view. Yeah, okay, very true. What comes to mind is the automatically finding him attractive. You could certainly, I think, open a romance novel with a woman is awakened to find a strange man in her bedroom, like a Sleeping Beauty type trope, but then obviously, she's gonna freak out. Like, and probably not be okay with this and fight. And then you can turn it into a funny story after that. But yeah, definitely I agree with her on that. Characters and backstory. So Laura Bradford from Bradford Literary Agency says, I don't like descriptions of the characters where writers make them too perfect. Heroines and heroes who are described physically as being virtually unflawed come across as unrelatable and boring. No flowing windswept golden locks, no eyes as blue as the sky, no willowy perfect figures. I do agree with that, and I think I've said in a couple of blog posts on my website in the past that, like, having characters that are too perfect makes them unrelatable, and then the reader is unlikely to really enjoy reading about them. Adam Cromie from Movable Type Management says, many writers express the character's backstory before they get to the plot. Good writers will go back and cut that stuff out and get right to the plot. The character's backstory stays with them. It's in their DNA. Okay, so I do agree with this to an extent if, like, the main plot of the story is about something that happened in the past. It's probably best not to come out and reveal that main thing in the past immediately, and that you can allude to it over time throughout the story, and then eventually, the reader pieces it together, or towards the climax or the end of the story, the character reveals it outright. So I think that it's important to identify what is the main thing that happened to set your character on the trajectory. So, like, to explain. So in All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter, there's kind of like 2 moments in my character's life that kind of set her on a certain trajectory. So one of them is her father leaving her and her family and never coming back, which happens when she's 10. And that is revealed in the prologue, or first chapter, what you will. However, then by chapter 3, it's revealed that something actually even more devastating and traumatizing happens, but we don't say what it is. And so that thing is what motivates her ultimately throughout the story, but in an underlying way, like her dad leaving her family also is a motivating factor. But I felt like there was only room for really one big thing to be kind of alluded to rather than two things. So I felt like it would be better to just come outright and say that her father abandoned her family when she was 10, and then keep secret the other thing that happened to her that kind of set her on the path that she's on throughout the plot of the story. I just didn't think it would be smart to do two big secrets, because that might be too difficult for me, too much for the readers to distinguish between the two. So I just felt like that would be smarter. But for the most part, I do agree with that. Okay. Stephanie Evans from Fine Print Literary Management says, I'm turned off when a writer feels the need to fill in all the backstory before starting the story. Okay, that was my mistake in The Last Chance. A story that opens on the protagonist's mental reflection of their situation is a red flag. True. Okay. Rochelle Gardner of Books and Such Literary says, one of the biggest problems is the information dump in the first few pages, where the author is trying to tell us everything we supposedly need to know to understand the story. Getting to know characters in a story is like getting to know people in real life. You find out their personality and details of their life over time. Yes, agreed. Yep, you don't want to info dump. I feel like we've covered this pretty sufficiently. Definitely just drop little nuggets here and there of character development throughout the story. Okay, that's pretty much it. I mean, I will link the article that I just read so you can read through it again in your free time, but I think that this is just some sufficient advice of what not to do when you're beginning your novel. But of course, then that begs the question, what do you do when you're beginning your novel? So it seems like doing the opposite of what they said don't do. So instead of a false beginning, have this be obviously the real authentic beginning. Not waking up from a dream, none of that. So it's just the character is real, alive, awake life. And again, thoughts on prologues? I like them, but I don't plan to get traditionally published. So it's up to you. If you want to get traditionally published, don't do them. But personally, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I like them, and I've accepted that I'm writing books that I like to read. So, whatever. Okay, exposition and description. Yep, don't info dump. Don't purple prose. So I guess, what would that look like if you're doing the opposite? So it would be starting with an action, cutting the fat off, and just having a very lean story beginning. Just the information that the readers need to know, and none that they actually don't. Not like having a scene where it just kind of opens up and the character's left like, oh, what's going on? Where are we? So, yep. And then obviously not too many adjectives, not too much description. So, not too much thinking, more action. Something realistic, like a real reaction the character would actually have. I guess that pretty much just sums it up. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for watching. As always, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel. If you're interested in my books, I will have links to my email newsletters and the books that I publish that you can purchase on Amazon, which would be The Last Summer and The Last Time. And then the third book in the Last Summer series, The Last Chance Rough Draft, is on Wattpad. I'm also going to post it on my website. All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter right now is a new series, and I have the rough draft for that on Wattpad, probably also my website. And Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost, and that's the sequel to the other one. And that one I've just started writing, posted on Wattpad, may post on my website. Anyways, all the links will be down there. If you're interested in reading them, read them. If you're interested in buying my books, buy my books. And if you want to keep up with what I'm up to and when the official final versions of my novels are going to be published, please subscribe to my newsletter, which then I can update you when that actually happens. So go ahead and do that too. Thank you guys.